Ivan Pavlenko, From Family to Family, Chapter 3, Part 2, Difficult and Painful Employment. Read by Natalia Buzova. The first honeymoon flew by quickly. The second started, and I couldn't find a job. Yegor was appointed a laboratory assistant at the distillery by his relative, Antin Pavlovich Solonuchev, who worked in the district party committee, and my employment was difficult and painful. Wherever I went in search of work, I ran into the same obstacle everywhere. Former prisoners of war were not allowed to take any prestigious service, especially managerial ones, only as an ordinary worker on a collective farm or as a manual laborer at a factory, mine, or lumber yard. I thought about getting a job from the very first day I returned to my native village. There was no way I could continue my studies in the third year of the land management technical school in those hungry years. There was no money for that. Recruiting for the mines or logging operations from which others were fleeing was also not possible. Under the patronage of Uncle Alexei, who worked as a teacher in a secondary school, I tried to get a job there as a military leader. The director, the headmaster agreed. All that was needed was a referral from the military commissariat. I went there and wrote an autobiographical application, filled out a questionnaire with the column "was in captivity," and they refused. At that time, Zayats was the head of the village council. He himself came from the village of Tokari, was demobilized, had primary education, but was a party member. He called me to his office and said, "You've had enough of walking around. Take over the shop. I will call the district utility union, and you will go to the approval tomorrow." I went to the district, and there the personnel department repeated the same story with the application. They refused. It was not just offensive. Malice was brewing in my soul against Stalin and his partyocrats, who made a career out of our blood and our torment. Finally, I was completely hurt by the response of the main armored directorate from Moscow to my letter, in which I asked to determine my fate. Since I had graduated from a military school and instead of graduating, went into battle, was seriously wounded, and ended up in captivity. I don't know what was written in that answer. They did not show it to me at the military commissariat, but only explained in verbatim as follows: "You should not write, but go to the collective farm and raise the peasantry so that you can atone for your stay in captivity." It was a cynical and brazen blow, after which I began to understand that the Stalinist dictatorship was criminal and anti-people. I went into hiding and became a human who hated the existing system and at the same time sought a place under the sun under its immoral laws. The first thing I dared to do was nowhere to say or write that I had been in captivity, since my honest frankness turned against me an evil that I did not deserve. Thus, in the questionnaires, instead of captivity, a record of a stay in the hospital appeared. It was also added when exchanging a temporary ID for a permanent military ID. This started the second stage of my life. I didn't rush anywhere, but went to work on the collective farm. I brought straw from the field to the farm, where it was cut into small straw from morning to evening and mixed with pulp, which was given to cattle. I also carried elder from the meadow to the workshop, took manure to the fields. I liked working with ordinary people. and I began to gradually come out of the state of shock into which I had been thrown by loyal Stalinist bureaucrats. One thing was troubling: payment of labor. My soldiers' boots, coat, and breeches were worn out, and I could not buy new ones for payless working days. In the evenings, I went to the club run by Nadezhda Protsakova, a Komsomol member with pre-war experience. There was a drama club to which was invited. I was, or it was managed by Mikhailo Prokhorenki. He was a naturally gifted humorist with acting skills. He had returned from Germany in the summer. During the day, he studied in the 10th grade, and in the evening, he held rehearsals. We became friends. Under his leadership, such plays as The Godfather or Saturn in a Barrel, If You Have a Sausage and a Glass, a Quarrel Will Pass, turned into a full West stage. But the play, quoting on Honcharivka, was particularly successful. We staged it together in a new club with a big stage in a former church. It was full of people, old and young. Those who did not have enough space in the hall stood along the walls. It must be said that in those days there was neither radio nor newspapers in the village. The peasants did not subscribe them in advance because they had no money. Only the rural council and the office of the collective farm received several copies each. We learned about what was happening in the country mainly from various regional officials who came to take bread, place a state loan, collect taxes, and at the same time talk about the successes of communist construction. Therefore, interest in performances as a kind of relief in a gray and impoverished life was natural. The role of Stitsko was played by Mikhailo himself, Prokip Shkurat by me, his wife by Halka Onipчиха, their daughter by Nadka Yeroshukova, Mykola Berezhnyakov by Alexei, and the retired soldier Skorik by teacher Alexander Romanovich Prokopenko. Maybe we didn't play that well, but from the heart. And the play itself was wonderful, full, close, and understandable to the rural audience. Time after time, the hall erupted in laughter, and at the end, there was a long, grateful applause. But Mikhailo soon left us. He finished the 10th grade and was preparing to enter an institute. It was a tangible and irreplaceable loss. No one else has played his roles. Stitsko quoting on Honcharivka, Kuksa turned into fools, Timosh to the first meeting so vividly and convincingly. The management of the drama group was passed to me. It was not easy. There was little help from the manager of the club, Nadezhda Myhal. She did not take part in amateur artistic activities. She was only the one who opened and closed the club. It's true, she was paid only 15 working days a month. In connection with the transfer of the club to a new premises and the revitalization of cultural life in it, the board of the collective farm raised the salary of the manager to 25 working days and appointed to this position the former teacher of Alexander Romanovich Prokopenko, who had just returned from captivity. He was not taken to school. I don't know whether it was for ideological reasons or for health reasons. He was a 30-year-old man, handsome, educated, and cheerful. In the very first performances, he showed himself as a talented actor-comedian. Prokopenko was a good organizer. He gathered the members of the group on certain days for rehearsals, prepared the stage, and wrote the roles. And the directing work was purely on me. I was so fascinated by it that I even bought the book by the outstanding theater actor Stanislavski, an actor's work on himself. and thoroughly studied it. Looking ahead, I will say that in 3 years, we played almost all Ukrainian classics, in particular such masterpieces as Natalka Poltavka, Moskal the Magician, Shelmenko Denshik, Nazar Stodolia, Give Your Heart Freedom, It Will Lead into Captivity, On Revision, 100,000, Martin Baruля, Talentless, and when we were criticized for the party by the partycrats for being too fond of white trousers, we also staged some modern plays, Makar Dibrova Behind the Second Front, and several humorous one-act plays. With individual, well-prepared performances, we also went to neighboring villages, Tepuki and Luka. And one act from the play Makar Dibrova was staged at the regional inspection of amateur artistic groups. There were many people who wanted to play in the plays, but in the process of testing, only some got on the stage. Gradually, a more or less stable team was formed. There was also a certain specialization. Lyrical, heroic actors and humorists stood out. I would like to say more about some of the most gifted and selfless members of my group. Zakharko Oleksievich Shostak, a collective farm worker, the oldest amateur dating back to pre-war seniority. At that time, he was already over 40 years old. He played somehow naturally, authentically, and had a beautiful voice, baritone. Alexander Romanovich Prokopenko, head of the club. Kirill Antonovich Teslenko, teacher, 30 years old. Hanna Onipko, collective farm worker, 22 years old, constant mother or grumpy aunt. Nadezhda Kuzmivna Yaroshchuk, village council secretary, 22 years old. Anyuta Petrivna Shish, student, 18 years old. Nastya Fedorivna Romanenko, collective farmer, 28 years old. Grigory Gavrilovich Kumpan, collective farm worker, 18 years old, one of the youngest and most talented. He played the accordion, danced well. Somehow, a directive came from the district to prepare a choir for a contest, and Prokopenko began to feverishly collect singers from all over the village. About 40 people gathered, and all of them were elderly people from the former church choir. The voices were excellent, long polished. There were several young women and me, and Maxim Streltsev. The old man, Andrei Kisilya, former churchman and regent of the church choir, led the choir. He had a tuning fork. He tapped it against his finger, put it to his ear, and hummed sol, mi, do, until he caught the right note. He sang a cappella without accompaniment. All were in casual Ukrainian clothes. We performed Shevchenko's Testament and Cherry Orchard around the house, as well as the folk song, Oh, a Dove Flew Across the Garden, and a modern one, Budionny's Cavalry. In the end, I sang the Sycamore Stands Over the Water myself. As Prokopenko later told us at a meeting based on the results of the contest, the head of the district department of culture said that the Yashniki choir was strong with its voices, but there were few young people in it, and the repertoire was outdated. Then we needed songs about Father Stalin and Mother Motherland and about our happy life, and we sang about what was close and dear to us. That is why we returned from the district contest without praise and awards. A few days after that, the old man Kisil came to me and started talking about the fact that I had a good voice that could be useful. And then he added, the archpriest of Lochvitsa asked me if there was a suitable man in the village with a good voice to send to study at the Odessa Theological Seminary at the expense of the church. I was shocked, by such a sudden and unusual offer. It seemed risky to me. After all, priests were persecuted and thrown into prisons, and I was obviously registered with our non-sleeping bodies anyway. It was too much to jump into one more mess, and I refused. Judging by the way things were going in the club, one might think that material life in the village was also improving. No, it remained impoverished. The war was over, and people, especially front-line soldiers, were convinced that now we would recover. After all, they had won. They had saved not only themselves, but also Stalin and his entire system from the Hitlerian plague. But peace came, and the state continued to take everything grown by hard work in the fields and produced on farms. Now, it seemed to be about rebuilding the national economy. Yes, something was really going there. But thousands of echelons with food and military equipment were sent into a continuous flow to China and Vietnam, to the countries of the so-called People's Democracy, to support the world communist revolution and expand the territory of the Soviet Union and its political influence. A collective farmer was given only 200, 300 grams of grain per working day. As money, not a penny. And taxes remained prohibitively high. Not only hundreds of homesteads were taxed, but also every fruit-bearing tree. So people cut down orchards. Natural food taxes were even heavier. Each yard had to hand over 475 liters of milk, 44 kilograms of meat, raised calf, 120 eggs, and one pig skin to the state. It was not allowed to tan off pig's skin. Just peel off and hand over the skin to the state. Otherwise, courts and fine. During the war and after the war, every year in the month of May, they spread a state loan bond for tens of billions of rubles among population. It was done forcibly. An authorized person from the district committee of the party came to the village and, together with the head of the village council, created groups of agitators who went from house to house and agitated the owners until they signed up for the presented amount. If words did not help, the agitators rummaged through the attics and sheds in search of more compelling arguments, a moonshine machine, a tan skin, or some other crime, and the owner gave up. This execution lasted as a rule several days until the total amount of bonds determined by the district for the village was spread. And then the district newspaper wrote about how gladly the collective farm workers accepted the state loan and gave their savings for the benefit of the beloved motherland. The cynicism of the authorities knew no bounds. I remember a witty comment on this matter by Sviridivka's old man Klim. He was then about 80 years old, small, thin like a rusk, and gray. He lived in a dilapidated hut, which had nothing to heat with in the winter. Then he climbed into the oven for the night, and there also into a bag made of goat skins. So he slept until morning. Some people called him a weirdo who lost the tenth rivet in his head in his old age, while others said that he was just pretending to be a fool so that his ironic and sharp attacks against the Soviet government would not cause punishment. When he said something, he simultaneously danced and sang along. He pretended to be on stage. When the train leaves from us to Moscow, it snorts heavily, as if it is climbing a steep mountain. Rye-wheat, choo, 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 rye-wheat, choo, choo, choo. And when it returned from Moscow, it ran easily, as if it was rolling from above. Brooch pins, a little powder, chew, chew, chew. Brooch pins, a little powder, chew, chew, chew. And already at the station, it would shout, Bonds! At the same time, Klim imitated the heavy and light movement of the train with his feet and voice. And at the end, raising his head up and pinching his ear, he whistled and shouted in an old man's voice, Bonds! Earlier, locomotive drivers had given a sharp, shrill signal, a whistle. The collective farm was also suffering. All state goods were expensive, and collective farm products were taken for nothing. The money that the state paid, for example, for potatoes, was not enough even to pay for the convoy lorries that were used to take them to the station. Animal husbandry was also unprofitable. Sugar beets helped a little. People could hardly survive. They went to the field, cut ears of corn, picked up grain, and put it into their pockets while working. That is, they resorted to what was qualified by the courts as theft of public goods. Priska Polikarpova was sentenced to 9 years for taking a basket of corn cobs in a field. Alexander Golub was sentenced to 6 years of prison, having collected a bunch of sugar beets on a plowed plantation. A legless war invalid paid a fine of 100 rubles for tanning a pig. On the collective farm, people were not paid. 200 grams of grain for a tiring day's work cannot be called a salary, but they were forced to work. A man had to work at least 180 working days a year, and a woman 120. Those who did not meet this standard were accused of idleness, and some were taken to court. According to this law, Maria Burisenkova and Fedorka Pavlina were sent to remote areas of the country for forced labor. In our family, the main source of the living wage was the vegetable garden, and the garden as well as the cow, pig, and chickens. Almost everything from this source, butter, cheese, eggs, fruits, was sold at the bazaar for literally pennies. Mother went to work. Although it was scary, she brought something home, in particular corn cobs and potatoes. And Brother Victor, with his friends, used to climb grain barns at night and bring grain. I also went to work regularly. The collective farm lacked oxen and horses. Therefore, the foreman demanded that people go out with their cows. They were harnessed to the yoke and they carried manure to the fields. And in the spring, they plowed the fields. You used to walk so much that you were unable to feel your feet. But in the evening, you ate some soup and went to the club.